Welcome back to another episode of Void City Customs. I am Dan, and today I'm going to show you how I made my own custom version of the Demon Batman from Batman Begins, when he busts into Arkham Asylum to rescue Rachel. I always thought that design was really cool, and I was always sad you only saw it for about 2 seconds in the movie, and it was just pretty much his face. You never got to see the rest of the suit, and all they did to dirty it up and make it look really cool and all different and changed because of being a hallucination, essentially. And I always thought it would be cool to have an action figure of that. It's not 100% screen accurate, but at the same time, he's kind of like a hallucination of Batman from someone who's only seen him ever for like a couple of seconds, really, when he wasn't like, you know, on fire or anything like that. So really, I don't mind that it's not completely screen accurate. I just wanted to get the face to look right, and I wanted the belt to be correct because there's a couple details I think that would make it recognizable. And I got those, and I'm happy. So I'll show you guys how I made this and let you know everything you need. The first 2 things you're going to need are 2 McFarlane figures. I used the Vampire Batman figure, which is basically just Hush Batman with a different paint scheme and a different head sculpt like a vampire. And I used the Dark Knight figure from the Dark Knight movies, the Christian Bale one. So I got the 2 of those, and that's actually this one right here, pretty much. This one just has a custom cape. This is my custom Batman Begins figure, by the way. This is also one I did a video for, which you could also check out if you want to. I have these here just to show comparison for the new guy, who is, as you can see, a bit taller, but he's like a hallucination demon monster at this point, so I'm fine with that. I kind of wanted him to be taller for once, so, you know, thank you, Todd, for, I guess, seeing ahead that I would need a taller Batman figure and making this monstrously tall Hush Batman sculpt that I could use for this. So the first thing I really needed to do was to remove the cape from the Vampire Batman, and that is done right over here on this part. And essentially all I did was heat up some water on the stove. I got it to boiling and poured it in a different container, like a big plastic bowl, and I dunked him in it, you know, upside down, so the top half of him got all warm and everything. Kept him in there until he was very pliable, and at that point the cape, I pretty much just peeled the whole thing right off the back of him. And it comes right off the front. There's a divot in the front where the cape plugged into the chest. I'll tell you how I took care of that later on. We will get to that at some point in the future. And then the next thing I had to do was basically just take apart the whole vampire figure because I was going to be painting him. So again, dunked him, and then just pull apart all the pieces. I like to take apart the figures after they've been heated up because it makes it a lot less likely that you'll break any of the plastic. But anyway, got him all apart into pieces, laid them all out, so I knew all the parts I would need to paint. And that's also when I removed the belt from the Vampire Batman, just peeled it right off. Again, it was pretty easy to do. It's just only glued on in a couple little places around there, and once you heat it all up and everything's very bendy and pliable, it kind of just peels it right off there. If you have to dunk it a couple of times, reheat it, you have to. I mean, sometimes there's more glue, sometimes there's less. If there's more glue and it feels like it's about to rip, just redunk it again and go slow. If you need to, get in there with a really fine tip X-Acto blade. You can start kind of cutting around in there, but just make sure you're not cutting the plastic, just kind of cut the glue. Usually you don't need that, usually. If you have patience and you dunk it enough times, keep it hot enough, keep it pliable enough, you should be able to get it plied apart. But just be careful because those softer parts can rip and that can be a problem. Then you might need to get a whole new piece and that sucks. Next, I grabbed a Dark Knight figure and I kind of did the exact same thing. I dunked him, took him apart, and I kept the head, and I peeled the belt off of his pelvis, and I kept the belt. So I just have the head and the belt from the Dark Knight figure, and that's all I used for this guy. Everything else is from the Vampire Batman. I did attach the belt to the Vampire Batman trunks at that point. Pretty much just slid right on in place where the other one had been, and I used a little bit of my old standby, this Gorilla Glue right here, and I put a couple dabs on the inside there and glued the belt back on to the piece, and then I let that dry because that needed to get painted still. And then the next thing I did was put the head together. So the Vampire Batman, its head is basically the Hush Batman head with a big scary vampire face instead. So it has these smaller ears, and they're kind of coming out more of the side of the head rather than the back like the Dark Knight ears do. And I didn't really like that, even though he's kind of like a transformed version. The Demon Batman still had a shape like Christian Bale's Cowl, so I wanted that to be distinct because it's recognizable. So this is where I did some more surgery, which I know you guys know me for doing these crazy surgeries on these figures. Some people say it's a little too much effort. I don't know, I like to make cool customs. Whatever, I want them to look right. What I did was essentially, I took the Vampire Batman head and I cut out the whole back chunk here, just all the way across the whole back chunk, and just took the whole section off of the back of his head where the ears are. And I did the exact same thing with this guy. Just cut around the side and all the way around the back, up the other side and down the top. Just took that whole section where the ears were off. And I did this all by eye. I didn't like measure anything. I pretty much just lined them up by sight and just cut them. I heated them up first so they were really soft and they were easy to cut, so that you could do each cut with one press and then be done. Heat it up again, one press, be done, do it again. And when I was done, the pieces fit together and I Gorilla Glued them, and that was that. There's one other step, but we will get to that in a moment. But essentially, yeah, as you can see now, you can't even really see where they came together. It's pretty difficult. I really like that because now it gives it the distinct Christian Bale cowl shape that the Hush Batman vampire face just did not have. So the next step, like I was talking about, are these gaps that were on the chest and around the head here, and also even around the sides of the cowl and the corners of the mouth, because it had a different cowl shape like the Hush Batman. Again, I wanted the more Christian Bale cowl shape that was right around the mouth there. So I grabbed this stuff right here that I use pretty much in a pinch whenever I need to sculpt anything. It's called Apoxie clay, and essentially what you do is you take 50% of this one and 50% of this one, however much you need, and you mix them together, which basically is just like mixing two colors of clay. So if you've ever done that, you just mix it until it's completely mixed, and then you sculpt with it, and then you let it dry, and then basically it's almost like a plastic sculpt, and you just paint over it and it's fine. So I filled in this gap right here where the cape had come out of on the Vampire Batman. I filled in the tiny gaps around the sides of the mouth on the cowl, just so that there was more Christian Bale shaped. And I also filled in a tiny bit of gaps that were around the side where the ears had left a bit of a gap from the cuts, and also around the back. And I sculpted in some little wrinkles in there just to kind of hide where any seams were and give it more of a texture. And that way, when he was painted, it was smoothed over and there was no holes in him anymore. The next step, because this was a Hush Batman body, he's very smooth. Now, the Batman Begins armor was also pretty smooth once it was painted black, but when he turned into the Demon Batman, he was all disgusting and gross and dirty. It almost looked like there was mold and maybe like mud and kind of like fungus growing all over him. And I kind of wanted to add that sort of a texture to him. So what I got was this fabric paint here at the craft store, and it's a Tulip brand slick fabric paint. And it's a very, very fine tip nozzle, and basically what I just did with that was just dabbed all over the top of the figure, who didn't have the cape on at that time, by the way. Remember, there's no cape on the figure while I'm doing all this stuff. The cape was the last step. So I just pretty much just dabbed all over this figure and left kind of like little, textures where I wanted it to be. And after that dried, I repeated that step maybe like 2 or 3 times, because this stuff does kind of like level out when it dries a little bit. So the texture was still there, but it had like flattened out some. So I just kind of went over areas and built it up in places, so like he had that texture on him. And that way, once he'd be all painted flat black, there'd be more of like a texture to him. It'd look more sculpted, which is what I wanted. Which leads me to the painting, which once again, I used my handy dandy Duplicolor vinyl fabric spray. And it's meant for like outdoor vinyl and fabrics. It's also meant for like car seats and car interiors, but by car seats and outdoor vinyl fabric, yes, that means it's for flexible, softer vinyl and plastics. And that means that they'll work on the hard plastic and the soft plastic parts of these figures. A lot of times when you paint on the soft plastic parts with certain acrylics or some other paints even, they will either never set properly. I don't know what it is. They just never really set and they'll stay kind of tacky forever, and that's no good. Or they will dry, but then the second you pose the figure, because the piece is flexible, they will crack and then pieces will chip off, and then that's a problem. This stuff is flexible and it's very rub resistant. So as far as like paint rub and everything, I've pretty much never had a problem with this stuff ever. Even in the joints, I haven't had to sand down the joints or the knees or the elbows, anything like that. So this stuff is pretty good. You don't have to use a primer on it. The only thing I recommend is just like with any time you paint one of these action figures, wash your figure off first with some dish soap in the sink, rinse him off, make sure he's good and rinsed off and dry, and then paint it. A lot of these figures still have the oily mold release agent for popping them out of the molds in the factory. That's why sometimes when you get a figure, he'll look a little shiny or feel a little bit wet, or if you go to pose it, there'll be like some like moisture up in between the joint or up inside the torso. That's what that is. And it makes your paints never set. So if you paint over that, your paint will just stay wet and tacky and disgusting forever, and you'll have to scrub off the figure and hope you can salvage it and start again. Toast and I have both had issues where we thought the figure was clean and it just wasn't. So wash your figure, make sure. But as I was saying, got that Duplicolor vinyl fabric spray, got all my pieces set up, and I painted each one of those with the vinyl fabric spray, let them all dry. And then I reassembled the figure, which was all black then. And from there, I wanted to add a bit more paint detail to it. After being all black, some of the details are kind of hidden. So I wanted to kind of bring some of those out and sort of paint it the way the original Mattel 6-inch Movie Master figure was painted. I kind of liked how they did that because it's basically a black figure and then it had like gray dry brushing on the outside of it to sort of bring out the details and make them look kind of like gross and kind of dirty, sort of creepy looking. And I thought it looked really nice. So that's what I replicated for this guy. I got some gray paint and I got some black paint and I mixed them, and it was these two colors right here, actually, these exact ones. Game Color by AV, and I had Stonewall Gray and black. And I pretty much just mixed those colors, so I had sort of a darker gray than this is, but obviously light enough to stand out against that. And for dry brushing, pretty much what you do is you just want to like load your brush, and then you want to like wipe your brush off. So your brush is basically have almost no paint left on it at all. And then you start to kind of go at it sort of lightly. And what I would do is just sort of like brush at it lightly with fast strokes rather than get right in there. And from hitting it like that, it would leave little bits of paint just on the very surface, on all those little surfaces I made with the fabric paint, on the edges of the emblem, on the belt and stuff like that. And it just kind of makes some of the details stand out because it doesn't get deep into the cracks. So it makes like muscle definition stand out, and details on the belt and the suit and the face and everything pop out again. So there you go. Once I was happy with how the dry brushing looked on the figure and all the details looked like they had popped out a bit more, the last thing I needed to do for paint was grab the white right over here, just regular dead white is what this one is called, but it's just white paint, same brand. And I got a toothpick, and basically I would get the very tip of the toothpick in the white paint, and I went in as steadily as I could with my shaky old hands and put one dot in each eye so that he'd have a little highlight in each eye so his eyes would kind of stand out a bit more. Went back in after that again with the black after I had put the gray on the face, so now the black will actually stand out over the top of that again. And that's where I added in all the fun drool and all the fun like tears coming out of his eyes that he had in the movie, which looked kind of gross but also sort of awesome. So now you can kind of see those details. And that brings me to the last detail, which is obviously the cape. Now you can't be Batman without a cape. I've basically made this cape now 3 times. It's the same cape I made for him and the same cape I made for him. Same pattern on all 3 of them. It's a pattern that basically I found from someone's version of their own Batman Begins cape that I thought looked really good. It was very large, it had the full wingspan, and it looked to me like it does in the movie, so I kind of just basically eyeballed it and made a smaller pattern and traced that pattern onto the fabric, cut out the fabric, and did the same as I did for this figure. And basically just have 2 very small pins, and I pinned it in place, and then I used the fabric paint and the black paint to paint over them and kind of hide them a little bit so there's stuff in there. But this version of him did not have the cape clips like the Batman Begins suit had. It was basically just the cape was coming out of his collarbones, essentially. It just looked like it was just morphing out of the suit itself, which looked kind of almost organic on this part of it. It's a pretty big cape. It can be posed all around him if you want it to. You can do all kinds of things with it. It is not wired. I don't really do wired capes because you start adding sewing onto these capes. A lot of times it really kind of diminishes the believability that it's a miniature. It just looks like giant sewing on a small cape. But you can do all sorts of stuff with it. You can drape it how you want. I usually just end up throwing it over his back like it was in the movie. But you can really do whatever you want with it. I did throw a little tiny extra gray paint around the top of the cape there, just to kind of dirty it up a little bit. But otherwise, you can do whatever you want. It's up to you. That's the fun about customizing figures. You can do whatever you want. One thing I did not do, as far as a bit of the rest of the sculpt in the movie and on the actual sculpt itself in real life, the ears were also shaped a lot more detailed and kind of almost like a bat demon monster sort of a thing. I could have gone that route and I was tempted to do it, but I thought if I screwed it up, then that would make all the work I did switching out the ears just kind of gone. A lot of the other figures I see of this version don't have that feature on it. I don't know, I didn't think it needed it. I just left it. So instead, what I did do though is I cut the big slit out of the forehead, because that is another detail that he had on the face, where there's just a kind of a big divot in the forehead there. So I did add that, and I thought with that, mixed with the gritted teeth and the reshaped cowl, it gives it the Christian Bale Batman Begins look, and that's what I wanted. So there you go. Now I've got the Batman Begins Demon Batman from that movie. Now all I need is a Jonathan Crane figure in a suit. I'll probably just end up stealing the body from the Lucius Fox in the black suit and just trying to find a Cillian Murphy head online somewhere, which is pretty easy, and get some little glasses and throw them on there. And there you go, Dr. Crane. Maybe you'll see that coming from me in the future if McFarlane doesn't get to it first. Well, that about does it for this Batman Begins Demon Batman custom figure that I made. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. It just kind of came together one day when I remembered out of the blue that I actually had the Vampire Batman and was thinking, hey, I wonder with that crazy face, what else I could do with it. His suit is similar to Batman Begins, and maybe with some paint and a couple pieces from the other figure, maybe I can make it happen. And a couple hours later, here it is. So you never know when these things are going to happen. It's always good to have the parts ready to go. If you have the time, you know, just make it happen. Stay tuned on the channel. We're going to have more customs to come from both myself and from Toast. We're going to have more reviews, obviously. We're going to have more podcasts. We're going to have more everything. So just stay tuned, like and subscribe, and leave comments. Let us know if you like the customs. Let us know if there's any more you want to see as far as customs, or if there's any toys you want to see us review, any movies, any shows you have opinions on, and you want to know if we have opinions on them too. I'm sure we probably do. You know, until next time, I am Dan. Have fun customizing, and if you have any questions, you know, shoot them my way. I'm always glad to help. Thanks for watching. This has been Void City Customs.